Hello, everyone, and welcome to a brand new episode of Honestly Let's Talk. My name is Todd Nesloni. I'm your host, and let me just say, I hope that my power and Wi-Fi stay on through this conversation. Both my guests and I today reside in the great state of Texas, and right now there is just craziness and heartache and struggle going on with power, water, food, everything like that. I was telling my guest this morning that I was like, I don't know if we're gonna be able, and I was like, oh wait, my power came on. And then I messaged him this evening and I was like, it stayed on all day. So we're gonna try this. We're gonna attempt to have this conversation because I still have to boil all my water, but I do have power and Wi-Fi for the time being. So thank you everybody for joining this. This is a weekly conversation over a variety of topics with a variety of different people that I love and respect. My special guest today is my good friend Tyson Jones. Tyson, tell everybody who you are.
Hi guys, I'm Tyson. I've had the pleasure of knowing Todd for several years now. I don't remember exactly how long. It feels like a decade. I live in Dallas, Texas, and I work in education. I've worked as a teacher, an assistant principal, and a principal. I'm currently serving in Richardson as a vice principal at an elementary school. And I'm also a student at Baylor University.
Awesome. Well, as I said at the top of the show, I have these conversations every week over a variety of topics. And through 2021, I've decided to choose just one person instead of some panels. I'm going to bring the panels back, but we've had conversation over books we love, what hides behind the smile. Last week's was the power of therapy. And for this week's conversation, I want to talk about something that I knew was really personal to my guest, but also plays a little bit into my family history as well. And that is alcohol addiction. I think this is something that is probably far more prevalent than we choose to talk about or acknowledge in many of our lives or the lives of our family members. And Tyson, I know this is also really personal to you as well. Let's just go ahead and start there. Tell me a little bit about why this topic is something that is part of your story.
So I think you explained it really well when you said that it's something that's a lot more prevalent than I think that we're aware of. And I love that it is the week after you talked about therapy because some of those things go so hand in hand together. But alcohol addiction is very personal to me because it's been something that I myself have struggled with. And one thing I notice with people around me who seem to be struggling with it is there's a certain level of shame and guilt around it, you know, that they don't want to reach out for help, or it's like, oh, I don't want anyone to know this because they might look at me differently. And as a result, so alcoholism or alcohol use disorder, however you want to describe it, is a disease and it's a progressive illness. So the longer that somebody goes without getting help, unfortunately, the worse their condition gets. You know, it's like being diagnosed with any other disease. If you find out about it and don't start getting help when you find out and just kind of hide it, it's going to get progressively worse. And one thing that I want to do by speaking candidly and openly about my journey is to hopefully help, even by just a small percentage, reduce some of the negative stigma that's around getting help for addiction, because it's a very common thing. Millions of people suffer from the disease of addiction, and I would like to see more people feel comfortable getting help for it.
You know, and there's several things that you said there. One of them is something that I like to say in all these episodes is the conversation that we're having today is one that is very unique to you in your journey. And so as we speak today, I want anybody listening to know that every journey is different. Every story is different. And so what we choose to share today may not exactly correlate with your journey or somebody that you know, but hopefully there's some good takeaways. But the other thing is, I loved that you did acknowledge that this is a disease, whether it's addiction to alcohol or drugs or social media. I mean, even your there's all kinds of food addiction. All of that is a disease and is something that we can become very feel judged by and not seek help because we don't think it is where it is. When was the point that you realized that, oh, this is more my consumption of alcohol is more than what I would consider typical?
So that's a great question. And I think it was prolonged for a while because as a child growing up and what you see like in the media and TV, when you hear about someone with an alcohol problem, you get this image in your head of like, you know, a homeless person that's with a brown paper sack, like sitting on a bench. And that's kind of what you assume like alcoholism is. So there was quite a while that I think I probably could have seen some red flags, you know, in my own journey, but I kept that definition in my head. So I thought, well, I'm not at that point yet. So it's, you know, it must not really be that bad. And you and I have talked about some of my personal struggles and journeys in the past. In 2016, I lost my little brother, and I definitely feel like that was a catalyst for me, and it almost kind of made it an excuse for me to start drinking a little bit more, you know, because I thought, gosh, I'm going through a lot, so it's okay for me to have a few extra glasses of wine in the evening or drink a little bit more on the weekends because I deserve it. And, you know, that's what I hear so many people say. It's like, I deserve to be able to take a break. But what I noticed was that over time, it became not an occasional thing, and it became like a part of my daily routine. You know, it's like I get home from work, I open the bottle of wine. The couple of glasses, like, as I mentioned before, it's progressive. So it starts to get to a point where it's a little bit more and a little bit more. And I was feeling all of a sudden like not as productive. Right. And another thing I'll say, I was dealing with some depression and some anxiety, and I felt like it was a result of just everything that was going on in my life and kind of the cards I'd been dealt, but unknowingly I was making it worse by adding alcohol to it because alcohol is a depressant. So I think that's another thing too. If you already have some type of mental health concerns that you're working through, like depression or anxiety, and you drink on top of that, when you feel like you're providing yourself relief by taking the edge off, you can actually be worsening your condition. So I think it's when I looked up and realized that I wasn't the version of myself that I wanted to be anymore. I wasn't as productive. I was losing creativity. You know, I didn't desire to do the things that I used to really enjoy, like going to the park or reading a book or starting a new project. Like all of that kind of went to the wayside, and like wine was the thing that was my new like fun hobby to do. And that's kind of when I was like, you know what, this isn't me. This isn't the person that I'm meant to be. And I could see it getting worse. And that's when
I find that really interesting though, because, you know, a lot of the times when you talk to people who are struggling with addiction or have people in their family who struggle with addiction, not often do they become so aware that things have changed. Usually it's someone else that has to point it out for them. But in your story, you were noticing that things were changing about yourself and you didn't like the way those things were changing. You thought the alcohol was helping, but as things progressed, you realized that this is not the person you want to be. You're not doing the things you want to be. Am I hearing that correctly?
Yes, absolutely. And I'll also say that there were like friends and relatives that reached out. They were like, hey, is everything okay? You know, you don't seem like yourself anymore. And it was so easy to be dismissive and say, yeah, it's just been crazy with, you know, I'm going to school and working and I've got the dogs and Dallas is so busy. But after a few people reach out, then it's like, okay, there's obviously some sort of vibe that I'm giving off. Things aren't well. So there was some of that going on at the same time. But yeah, that's a good point that you bring out, because it takes, I think it does take a certain level of self-awareness to be able to say, hey, this isn't what I really like. This isn't what I envisioned for my life right now. And I definitely had gotten to that point.
So you mentioned that several people began to reach out to you. And I know that when you are friends or family with somebody who's struggling with addiction, sometimes you may not be comfortable reaching out because you don't want to push them away. You don't want to push too hard. You don't want to make things worse, but you also don't want to act like there's a problem if you're not really sure if there is, but you just have some concerns. When the people reached out to you, clearly they did it in a loving enough way for you to hear some of the concern. So what advice would you have to others who might be listening and they're like, well, I don't know how to reach out to somebody I'm concerned about?
Wonderful question, because depending on the way that you approach the person, you can really cause them to shut down or not feel like that they can trust you as a resource anymore. I would definitely start by kind of analyzing what the things are that you're noticing, like what trends, like, say if it's a friend, like if they're starting to miss a lot of like social gatherings, like, hey, you've kind of haven't been at the last few events that were planned and you're usually always there, or I notice you don't answer the phone as much anymore. I would just pick like certain activities that aren't really necessarily related to what you think the problem might be, but some of the signs, and just point those at them. I'm worried because you haven't seemed like yourself. You're not coming to gatherings. You're not texting us back. Is everything okay? And just leaving it very open like that. So you're coming at it in a very loving way, kind of like you mentioned. If you go to someone and say, hey, I think you're drinking too much and I'm really worried about you, that could really keep them from wanting to, like I said before, communicate with you about it. Definitely about that loving approach and not coming across in an accusing way.
And I think that's something that can be so hard to do, especially if you're super close to somebody, is you sometimes your deep concern for someone can come across as very accusatory when that's not the way you mean it. So I think, like planning it out in your head ahead of time and things like that, and even writing something down sometimes can kind of help you form a better way to approach somebody. But, in your own journey, you realized that for you, the struggle was bigger than you just saying, put the bottle down. I'm done. I don't have to do anymore.
Right.
How did you come to a point emotionally and mentally to be able to say, I need to put my life on hold a minute and get some help so that I can be better? Because I think sometimes that's something that holds people back too, is they're like, I don't want people outside of my circle to know. I don't want to pay for that. I don't want to go into any kind of treatment. I don't want to go see a therapist. I don't want to do any of that. Like, how did you get to the headspace to say, this is serious enough and important enough to me that I'm going to do whatever it takes to get better?
So I definitely got to the point where some of the things you just listed were things that I considered, like, gosh, what would people think? In my close friend circle, what would people at home think? What would my, coworkers think? But no matter what I listed there, it was never bigger than my life. And so I really had to come to the realization, being something that's progressive, if it, like I said, if it goes on and it's untreated, I could be to the point where I'm facing not being alive anymore, and I say that because I also have other very close personal reasons that I've seen end very tragically in my family that are related to addiction. And so I know it's possible. It's not one of those things that's like, oh, well, it's not going to get that bad. But if evidence is showing that it is going in that direction, I had to say, you know what? Nothing is bigger than me staying alive, because if I let this keep going, it's not going to matter what people at work think or what my friends think, because I won't be here anymore. So once I finally got to that level with it, where it took that deep of an understanding, even though it was still difficult to make some of the decisions that I made, to step away from work, a career that I loved, and potentially cause worry in people that didn't know there was an issue. It's like all of that is going to be there later for me to address. So that's when I went to treatment. I went to treatment for 30 days, and then really spent a lot of time after that just focusing on me and what a new lifestyle would look like. And I'm really glad that I made that decision, because it was still at that point I thought, I've got a treatment, but I didn't know that the journey with it still wasn't completely over. Because then I'm trying to learn how to live a different lifestyle. And I started introducing other things, like maybe if I tried like a program for moderation, to do it at a responsible level. So I tried some of those things, and unfortunately those weren't working out. And so I had to take additional breaks, receive additional help. And like I said,
Mhm.
it's your life, so you don't ever want to put something else in front of you being alive. And if you feel like it's getting to that point, then I'd say that's a question you really need to consider.
Well, you brought up a really good point there that I think is something people often forget is when you are receiving professional help or treatment and you're either in a facility or pulled yourself away. And, even when you think of people who have been incarcerated, when they come out and you're back in the world and back in everyday life, there's a lot thrown at you at one time that
Mhm.
you've got to, those on the outside really have to be loving and cognizant and present and there and not just assuming, well, you did that, everything should be fine now, you should be completely healed. It's like there's still a lot of work that
Yeah.
goes on. And so I'd love to know, though, through this entire process, what have you learned about yourself?
I've learned a lot about myself, and I think I've learned the biggest thing that comes to mind is I've learned who I am, and I've learned that I can become, for me personally, the only way that I can become the best version of myself is with sobriety, because I've proven over and over to myself by trying lots of different things that alcohol is just not something that can be a part of my life. It's just not healthy for me. And I think at first that was scary, because it's like, oh my gosh, how am I going to unwind, or how am I going to have fun? And I quickly learned that alcohol plays such a minimal role in those things. And if I'm in a situation where I'm counting on alcohol to have fun, then it's probably not that fun of a situation to be in to begin with. If my mind has to be altered to be enjoying what I'm doing.
Right.
So I learned how to have fun sober. I learned how to meet new people sober. Um, and it's also caused me to want to be healthier in other ways as well. Because I definitely, whenever I stopped drinking, I noticed like a lot pretty quickly, like positive changes in my body, like my energy level, my mood was a lot better. So it carries with it a whole array of benefits. But I've learned to be more confident in who I am, because a lot of times too, I know people can use alcohol as like a social lubricant, to be like, oh, well, if I have a little bit of wine or whatever, I'm more comfortable speaking. I feel like I'm funnier. Those are definitely things that are just in your head. So it's possible to be social and be funny without any type of substance at parties, at gatherings. And so it's definitely been a journey of self-discovery. And it kind of reminds me of that movie, like Eat, Pray, Love with Julia Roberts. Like that's kind of dramatic, I know, but you know me. So yeah, I would say like full self-discovery, and I'm still very much early in the journey. Actually, this Saturday in 2 days, I'll be celebrating 6 months of continued sobriety. And I thank you. Yeah, it's been a wonderful experience so far, and I feel like I'm only just beginning to see some of the positive benefits of it.
Well, first of all, I want to say congratulations. I know sobriety is something to be celebrated, whether it is a day, a week, or like you said, 6 months, and 2 days, it'll be 6 months. So bravo to that. But you said something in there as well that really struck me. I've known you for a while and we've got to spend some time together. And I love that you said, sometimes alcohol can make you believe that you're funnier, you're more sociable, things like that. And I remember, okay, people that follow me on social media may remember that Tyson and I got to go see the Kelly Clarkson show. And we got to sit in, what was it, the second row, third row, whatever the little couches. We were on TV. That's all that matters.
Right.
And I remember like spending that time with you. You were hilarious. And so it's so funny to me how we can create these perceptions about ourselves and then believe that when we consume alcohol, because we didn't consume any alcohol on that trip. And so to think that, when we consume alcohol, you may think, well, I'm funnier when I do this, or I'm a better person to be around when I do this. And me looking in from the outside, would have never thought that you needed alcohol to be any crazier than you already were, but you feeling like it was that part of you that brought out what you believe to be better parts of you. And I think that's a lot of the time what addiction can do for us, whether it's addiction to food or alcohol or drugs or anything like that. It makes you believe that that thing is necessary to continue on the way you're continuing. And so I'd love to know, if you have people today who are listening and think they may be struggling with some type of addiction, or they think their spouse may be, or their sibling, or their child, what would be a piece of advice you would give to them?
So there's a couple different things that I would suggest. The first one is, it kind of relates to what you were just talking about. You said something about, alcohol or addiction can make you believe other things that make you believe that you're funnier, make you believe that you're wittier. The other tough thing about addiction is it's really the only disease that makes you believe you don't have a disease. And so it's a battle, right, to come to that. And a lot of people call it surrender. It's like when you finally get to the point where okay, I've got to wash my hands of this. I admit this substance or this behavior has me beat, and I have to get help. Also, addiction, and this is kind of controversial or debatable, but a lot of people say that addiction is one of the only diseases that's self-diagnosed, right? You can be exhibiting a lot of sign addiction, oh my gosh, I live in a casino. I'm in there 20 out of 24 hours and my checking account's overdrawn and blah, blah, blah. But still, that doesn't give a doctor anything to say, okay, I'm going to diagnose you as an addict for gambling. It's something that you have to almost evaluate your life and how things are going. And because a lot of people will say well, really, you're only an alcoholic if you say you are, or a gambling addict if you say you are. So, and this may sound silly, but honestly, it's a good starting point. There's quizzes you can take online. You can Google, do I have a drinking problem? Do I have a gambling problem? And it honestly, there'll be questions that are kind of laid out and you can go through and answer yes, no, and it gives you an indicator at the end. But then another thing that I hear in a lot of interviews is if you're having to Google, do I have a drinking problem? That's usually a sign that there's some sort of red flag, right? Because people that don't have a drinking problem aren't Googling, do I have a drinking problem?
Yeah.
I would also say, if you're not sure, there's different resources and programs that are available. I don't know all of them for other behaviors and substances, but I know, for example, for alcohol, there's things like Smart Recovery, there's Alcoholics Anonymous, there's Celebrate Recovery. Lots of different places that you can go and just meet people and talk openly with them and kind of hear some of their stories. And that's a great way to start. I would say reaching out to somebody is the best place. And maybe you don't want that to be somebody that you know. So if you going to some of those recovery groups is a great way to be in a safe environment, to talk to other people that are having a similar experience as you and really start to hear what they to say, and that can help lead you in the direction that you need to go.
I love so much that you shared there. I'd love to know though, what is some of that stuff like Alcoholics Anonymous and all that look like during the COVID times?
So all of the popular recovery programs have switched to Zoom, kind of like the rest of the world. So anytime, you can go find a group online. By going to, you could just search, for example, AA meetings in Dallas, right? And it's going to pull up a list of all the popular ones. Now, people there's starting to be more in-person meetings again, but there's also definitely options for online, if you're not comfortable going out. And it would occur in a Zoom setting. So it's been a seamless transition, just like education. It's one of those things where the community said, this is something that can't stop, right? People still need the support. So I feel in a matter of days after everything crashed down almost a year ago, which is crazy, really quickly the online community for those groups picked up.
Well, Tyson, I just want you to know, I wasn't sure if you would be open to having this conversation so publicly with me, but I know, like you and I talked about before we went live today, the more we talk about things, the more that it helps others who didn't know they yet had the strength in them to deal with or talk about things. And so I appreciate your vulnerability and honesty. We both said it was serendipity that I reached out to you and you were like, that's right before my 6 months. That's like the perfect timing for me to talk about it. So that worked out as well. So again, congratulations on 6 months. Congratulations on the continued work that you're doing. And for anybody listening today, there are a lot of resources available online. There are a lot of professionals that you can reach out to for help and support as well. Don't ever be afraid to reach out to someone, let them know you're thinking about them or that you're concerned about them. So much goodness here today, Tyson. Thank you so much for coming on Honestly Let's Talk.
Absolutely. It's been a pleasure. And I think if I just had to leave with one final thought, if you're trying to decide if you should reach out or the shame and guilt, don't ever be ashamed of trying to do something to make your life better. Like at the end of the day, that's what you're trying to do. And you should have no shame in that. It's hard, but you have to remind yourself, I'm trying to make my life better.
I love that. That's the perfect way to end this. You can join every Thursday night for a brand new episode of Honestly Let's Talk, or go check out all the past episodes on YouTube or any of your podcast stations. Thanks again, Tyson.
Absolutely.